Hi, everybody. You may not all know this joke. This is a knock-knock joke. But since I'm going to talk about Orange, New Jersey, I have to tell this joke. So you can all help me. Knock, knock. Banana. Knock, knock. Banana. Knock, knock. Orange. Aren't you glad I didn't say banana? That was very good participation. I'm really proud of you. So this is my mom and dad, Maggie and Ernie. And so they were an interracial couple in the United States in the 1950s, which means they were very radical. And so my dad was a union organizer who lost his job as a result of McCarthyism, which was America's anti-communism. And so basically, we moved to this small town where my mother could buy a low-cost house. And this town is called Orange, New Jersey. You see that little shape there? And it sort of has East Orange over it, but it's not East Orange, it's orange. And my dad, who, as a union organizer, was, so unions in the United States were, the big industrial unions were organized during the Depression in the 1930s. And my dad was one of those people who, this explosion of unionism, he was one of the people that organized that. And he was the first paid black organizer for his union, United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, one of the foremost and most radical unions in the United States. So he was, as a paid organizer, and later in charge of its national fair practices, zooming around the country, meeting famous people. If there was anybody black and famous that was in Harlem in the 30s and 40s and 50s, he knew them, which I used to love, to just hear about how Sidney Poitier delivered ribs, or Harry Belafonte came by, or W.B. Du Bois, or sitting in a bar and watching Langston Hughes listen to the vernacular and write his simple stories, amazing stuff. And all of a sudden, he's in Orange, New Jersey, which is, he described, a little Jim Crow town going nowhere. So Jim Crow, of course, is an expression for segregation. And in little towns in New Jersey, segregation meant that black people were powerless, they had no voice, they had no organization. And so for him, this was stunning, having, I mean, the kinds of power that unions had in the 30s and 40s, where you could, blow a bell, and thousands of people would pour out of a factory and shut it down. The kind of enormous power of organization that he was used to. To suddenly be in this simple little place, very provincial, no Langston Hughes, no W.B. Du Bois, no Sidney Poitier, the corner bar, that was it. So it was a Jim Crow town and it was going nowhere. It was just stuck. And so my dad, who had lost his job because of McCarthyism, and also because of McCarthyism, couldn't get another job, fell into a depression. And my mother said, she didn't know what to do, but finally she said, I think you ought to organize this place because the schools are segregated. And as somebody who'd worked on fair practices, was a leader of the long civil rights movement, he knew exactly how to fight school segregation, and so was able to pull together a committee and desegregate the schools very, very quickly. And that gave people enthusiasm. And so it was a beginning of a new day for Orange. And black people, having succeeded in ending a very vicious kind of school segregation, a very vicious segregation, which they never thought to see the end of, suddenly felt empowered. Well, we can do something. And so they decided to run somebody for mayor. Now, in American segregation, blacks were a minority, 20% of the population, and everybody was elected by the whole city at large. There was no way, in the racist context of America, that white people were going to vote for a black person. So there was no way a black person could be elected at large. But that didn't matter. So despite the fact that my father knew the person couldn't win, Dr. John Alexander, who ran for mayor, the enthusiasm needed to move forward. And so he ran, and he ran on a platform, a people's platform, that set a new programmatic agenda for the city. So while all this is going on and it's exciting and it's building black power, I was a school kid and reasonably miserable. And I was really largely miserable, both because school segregation meant that I had to leave my school and go to a white school, which meant that I was in a minority, reasonably ostracized. And I was a shy, nerdy kid. I had no idea what to do next. So I just was like quiet and suffering. One of the few places that I found solace in the town was my church. And so this is me in Sunday school. We were building a model out of styrofoam of Nazareth. This is a Unitarian church, so we didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, so we didn't build, like the Jesus being crucified on the cross, sort of Jesus' life as a carpenter. So my life was rather miserable, but what was going on in town, this is my mom at the headquarters of Ben Jones, whose photograph is on the wall. What was going on for my parents was really very gripping because they were changing this little town, getting black power, and being able to implement a progressive agenda. One of the things they fought for was a new high school because the white elite that ran the city had refused to invest in the local schools. They sent their children to private school, and they didn't care about the education of the great mass of children in the schools. So although the state had said your schools are deficient and you will lose your accreditation, they had paid no attention to this, because to pay attention would mean they'd have to spend money. Now this was not just that they didn't want to spend money on the black children, they didn't want to spend money on the white working class children either. Orange, New Jersey is a small industrial city, and so there was Irish working class and Italian working class. And so the WASP elite didn't care about their education any more than it cared about my education or the education of any of the other black children. And so this is Dr. John Alexander speaking at a very crucial public meeting where they actually convinced the city council that they had to approve a bond of money to raise money to create a new high school. These are some scenes. This is what Orange, New Jersey looked like at one of the local settlement houses, the rec center having a craft fair. And my dad, with going across Dr. Alexander, Jimmy Murphy, Larry Gordon, some of the people, black and white, that had gathered together in the process of this movement and had become dear friends. So if in the beginning it was a small black community fighting to get some political power, by the end of my dad's life, he had created deep bonds of love and friendship across the political spectrum and across the racial spectrum of Orange, New Jersey. In the last year of his life, he felt it was very important to write a book about it. And I was really so moved to find that there are some copies of my father's book, Homeboy Came to Orange, here. What he wanted to say was that the flip side of segregation is separatism. Those two are conjoined. And separatism is often celebrated. It certainly was at that time, in 1970, when black nationalism was on the rise, that we shouldn't work with white people, we shouldn't be with white people, we should just be black by ourselves. And he said, that's impossible. We don't live in a society by ourselves, and we can't win by ourselves. In the union movement, when they built the industrial unions, black workers and white workers had learned to come together. As long as they were separated, the bosses would win. It was when they came together that they got better working conditions, that they got a 40-hour work week, that they got vacations with pay, that they got decent wages. As long as we were divided, we could be defeated. And therefore, what we had to learn was how to come together, how to have coalition. And so his book, Homeboy Came to Orange, A Story of People's Power, is about that coalition is how we get power, and how we work in these very difficult situations. There's nothing glamorous. There's nothing fun. And yet, what I think you see in this picture, and just the love that's in the people's faces, that in this dirty little Jim Crow town, he had discovered this secret that all places have the answer, that everything we need is already here. We have to see it and embrace it. I, however, this is the ribbon cutting for the new high school. This is one of the more embarrassing pictures of my whole life. I was a pouty adolescent, the sort of grown-up nerdy kid. I had not discovered this secret, and I was ready to go to the big city and never come back. And the main thing was never come back. So I became a psychiatrist and started to study AIDS and other epidemics. And what I discovered about those epidemics, which was a ferocious series of epidemics in the United States in the 80s and 90s, was that they were concentrated in poor communities that had suffered from disinvestment. And so we went on a tour of Bucharest, and walking around Bucharest was pretty much like walking around your standard American city. And the sort of urban renewal that you did, we did. The deindustrialization that you did, we did. The failure to invest in the homes of the poor that you did, we did. And in the course of that, we created conditions for massive epidemics. And so I had to understand cities, and I started to visit cities in the United States, in France, everywhere, just all the cities that I could go see, so that I could understand how to help. So by the time 2007 came around, I'd been a lot of places. I came back actually to my church, because Ben Jones, who was the first African-American councilman elected in my dad's organizing, was giving a sermon on Black History Month. I came back and we said, you know what, it's 50 years since all this organizing started. Why don't we have a party? And in the course of organizing that party, I would go back to Orange every couple weeks for a meeting. And I started driving around to all my old haunts. And I was really quite stunned, because this had rested in my mind as a dirty Jim Crow town going nowhere. And yet, when I went back, what I found was a little place, 2.2 square miles, that everything you need to know about the American city you can learn in Orange, New Jersey. Orange, New Jersey is founded in colonial times and has a colonial era graveyard. Orange, New Jersey has a pastoral cemetery, which was established not long after Mount Auburn's pastoral cemetery. Orange, New Jersey has a Frederick Law Olmsted Park. Orange, New Jersey has a Stanford White Library. Orange, New Jersey has a black ghetto and an Italian ghetto. Orange, New Jersey has hulking factories from deindustrialization. Orange, New Jersey was cut in half by a highway. The whole story of the American city is there, and you can walk around and see the whole thing. I was rather stunned with how precious. And so as part of the party, we went out on a tour, stood on a street corner, heard about how the current generation of activists had fought to keep the housing stock, and learned that the current generation of activists had taken the baton from my father and had fought for the city during all this time that I'd been gone. And therefore, the heritage of that organizing was there for me to see. Otherwise, Orange, New Jersey would have disappeared, because that's what's happened to poor minority cities in the United States. They've burned down. Another part of the party, it was a great party. And so many old friends, so many of the people that loved my dad and that I knew as a child were there. So proud of the work that they had done, truly important work, which had lasted in a way that I didn't know it had. And so I got involved, and my daughter Molly got involved in Orange, New Jersey. She worked with a project that was the first real storytelling project we did. The person who was organizing the storytelling project told her that she should go get stories from all the famous people in the city. I mean, if you're famous in Orange, New Jersey, that doesn't make you very famous, but you know, the sort of movers and shakers. Go interview the mayor, go interview the council people. And she said, no, I'm gonna talk to the teenagers, see who they want to interview. And so she organized a group of teenagers, and they had a different list. One of them really wanted to hear a ghost story. So they spent much of the 6 weeks that they were working on this project searching for a ghost story. They interviewed the head of the black funeral home, the major black funeral home, and heard a story about the oldest person who was buried from that funeral home. They heard a story about the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. visited Orange, New Jersey a week before he was assassinated, and that the FBI came to the head of the funeral home and said, should anything happen, this is what you should do. The set of stories that emerged from the work of these teenagers were the stories of every city in the world. There was the middle school dance, and the kid who told the story about his middle school dance talked about winning a strange hat and how he has a love-hate relationship with the hat he won at his middle school dance. I told about building Nazareth in my Sunday school class. My brother talked about being at that meeting where Dr. Alexander was fighting for the funding for the school. So from the political to the middle school dance to the ghost story, this is the stuff of a city. So in this very short period of time, I had understood that everything you needed to know about the American city was there, speaking more in terms of like form and structure and process. And then these kids had taken us deeper. Everything you need to know about the American city is right there in Orange, New Jersey, if you just listen to hear what people have to say, because everybody has an amazing story. And the city is the cumulative product of all those stories. We had the advantage, because through my studies of cities, I'd become connected to many American planners, urbanists. So we had the advantage of being able to bring some top thinkers about the American city to say, so what do we do? What do we do next? And one of the things they pointed out to us, which you can see on the diagram of the arrow going through the city, is that Orange, New Jersey was an early site of the railroad. The railroad came out to Orange in 1832. But that meant it was now a focus of what they call transit-oriented development, which means that they're going to put dense market-rate new housing around the train stations, not for the people who live in Orange, who are working people without much income, without much education, but for people with more income and more education to take the train to work in New York City or to work in Newark, to work not in Orange, but someplace else. they want to bring in a replacement population. They want to gentrify the city. They want to push out. William Morris, who is a professor at New School, one of my colleagues there, said, this kind of transit-oriented development is all about thinking of Orange as someplace you pass through. But they don't understand that Orange is a hub of hubs. And so in his drawing, you see all the things circulating, all the stories, all the people, all the life, all the living, and even all the confusion. So one of the things that happened in Orange was that Orange became a place people left. And the space that was opened up meant that it became a place that people who had even fewer options moved into. So although the black community and the white community that lived there when I grew up basically moved out, and who moved in were new immigrants. So Haitian people, and Ghanaian people, and Colombian people, and Peruvian people are the people who live in Orange now. But they speak a variety of languages, and they don't know each other, and they aren't connected to the history of Orange that I'm connected to. They have their own history of Orange. And so it's very complicated to think about how do all these groups get together. One of the things that we decided to do, since everything you want to know about the American city you can learn in Orange, New Jersey, was to start a university. And this is a free people's university, and it's called the University of Orange. Now, Orange is a majority black city, and it's poor. So in the way stereotypes are formed, poor black city and university are not connected. So to say, when you say in the area, especially if you say it to a white person who lives in one of the nearby wealthy suburbs, yes, I'm part of the University of Orange, they say, Orange has a university? To make it clear that Orange and university can't come together. But we made a University of Orange, and part of our mission is to record and share the stories of Orange. And we have put together this website, Hidden Treasures of Orange. We invite you to visit. And this has several parts. So first of all, About Us tells a little bit about the story of the University of Orange and what we're trying to accomplish. The second thing is that we know that the chasm is real. And the chasm is all of these things that have torn apart American society. The chasm is the segregation. The chasm is the deindustrialization. The chasm is the disinvestment. The chasm is the highway that wiped out all the houses that you see and replaced it with a place for cars. The chasm is real. And the chasm is the reason, because it's not just in Orange, New Jersey, it's every American city. The chasm is the reason that the United States is in the trouble that it's in at this moment. And so the issue of this chasm, how do we repair it? How do we bridge it? What do we do about it? So what we believed was that this experience of stories had taught us that there was a magic prism. And that was really where we had to start, with hearing the many voices of Orange, the many things that were going on. If we didn't understand the complexity and the beauty and the fabulousness of the city, we couldn't bridge the chasm. People had to be able to hear each other. And so we've done many kinds of lovely things to collect stories, to bridge this chasm. And the point of the website is to share the stories. And so we have an archive of these stories. And one of them, one of the really truly important ones, is the story of the highway, how it came through and how it demolished. What's interesting is how the archive of stories then becomes the platform for invention. One of the artists that I work with wanted to submit a mural for a contest. And she had seen the flyer that my parents had made back in 1956, when the great African-American artist, Paul Robeson, was going to perform in our backyard. Paul Robeson is one of the greatest African-American artists, celebrities of all time. Why was such a man going to perform in the backyard of my little house? It's again because of McCarthyism. He was a fighter for peace and for workers' rights, and so the US government took away his passport, wouldn't let him travel, and wouldn't let him work in the United States. So my parents had been trying to hire a hall, a concert hall or a church or someplace where he could perform, and every place they went, the FBI followed and said, if you let him perform, we will shut you down. The only place that wasn't afraid was my house. And so Paul Robeson came to my house, and the flyer announces that there's going to be barbecue and ping pong and horseshoes. And this artist thought this was just great. And the mural was for a center named in his honor now at one of the local universities, not the University of Orange, Rutgers, Newark. So now Paul Robeson is recognized as one of New Jersey's greatest sons. But then he couldn't get a place to perform. And the artist thought this is an important story to tell in honor of him, this moment in his life. And so these many stories of Orange become the platform for finding, what do we build from? There is a terrible feeling that people get when they walk into a place that has been disinvested, that has been torn apart by a highway, that's filled with undesirable, marginalized people. There is a terrible feeling of despair that nothing can be done, that there is nothing there. How often have I heard people walk into such a place with me and say, there's nothing there? Looking straight at people, looking straight at a store, looking straight at stuff that's there and say, there's nothing here. This is a trick in our minds, that when we get to places that have been marginalized, we see nothing. If we don't see Starbucks and we don't see Shishi, we see nothing. And so how do we begin to see? The simple act of seeing what's in front of us. And then how do we make the leap to know that everything we need is already here? And so this prism, this magic prism of stories, is one of the tools we're using to restore the urban ecosystem, to repair the chasm, and to create a future not by importing some better people, but by building on what we have that's already there. You may have noticed in these first two drawings the little house. So Bill Morrish was the first person to point out to us that the map of Orange looks like a little house. And so we needed to make a poster for a conference called 100-Year-Old House. And so they took the shape of the city. So that little house is actually the shape of Orange on the map. And so as opposed to thinking of it as a despised, marginalized place, we can now think of it as that little house. And for those of you who've seen the movie Up, you may recognize the riff on Up. Yeah, we're going up. I am very proud that this year, New Village Press will be reissuing my father's book, Homeboy Came to Orange, and that my daughter, Molly Rose Kaufman, will be writing a new epilogue, and that the University of Orange has taken the baton and will carry it forward for the next generation. Aren't you glad?